Finally, in his closing days, Joey Bishop came clean about the Rat Pack's sinister nature. Behind the scenes, there was a serious problem, even though he was their major comedian. Frank Sinatra's treachery, the multi-million-dollar offers he rejected, and the startling explanation for his exclusion from Hollywood history. The most popular comedy group in America attempted to conceal this story. On February 3, 1918, Joey Bishop was born Joseph Abraham Gottlieb in the Bronx, New York. His family was Jewish immigrants, and he was the youngest of 5 children. Jacob, his father, was employed as a bicycle mechanic. The house was maintained by his mother, Anna. Life was easy but difficult. In South Philadelphia, Joey's family relocated when he was 3 months old. That city served as the setting for his early years and influenced who he would grow up to be. South Philadelphia was a vibrant place. The streets were noisy. Everyone in the close-knit neighborhoods appeared to have a story to tell. Jokes were common in the Italian and Jewish communities where Joey grew up. Everyday issues were made into jokes, people made fun of one another, and they exaggerated their difficulties. All of it he took in. He had a knack for making people laugh even as a little child. He began with minor items. Jimmy Durante and Edward G. Robinson were among the well-known actors he mimicked. In addition to learning tap dancing, he began playing instruments including the banjo and mandolin. He had no trouble performing, but school was a struggle. He dropped out of school at the age of 18 because he was having trouble keeping up in class. He had to work and support his family. They were barely making ends meet with his father's bicycle repair business. Although Joey took on several tasks to assist, his thoughts were constantly focused on something greater. He realized the power of laughter to unite people. He imitated teachers, which made his peers chuckle. He made humor out of the peculiarities of the people in his neighborhood. He had no idea that he was laying the groundwork for a comic career. His sense of humor never left his house, despite his financial difficulties. His creative spirit was fostered by his family. They observed his ease in commanding attention. He was quiet and unassuming. His sense of humor was subtle, almost natural. He had a way of making a joke funny by delivering it with a straight face. He would later become well known in the entertainment industry for that approach. Getting started was difficult, but Joey wanted to take comedy seriously. He entered amateur competitions in search of any opportunity to perform. He received $3 for mimicking radio comics in a 1936 local contest. He was certain that he had something unique despite the fact that it wasn't much. It was vaudeville that gave him his first genuine break. He founded the Bishop Trio, a comedic group, with his brother, Maury. The name was inspired by Glenn Bishop, their driver. When more performers joined, they changed their name to the Bishop Brothers. They gave performances throughout New Jersey and Pennsylvania at burlesque establishments and tiny clubs. It was difficult to perform in these settings. The crowds were boisterous. It was a poor salary. Joey had to struggle for attention, but that only helped him. He developed the ability to read a room. He modified his jokes according to the audience. He didn't lose a beat switching to a new routine if the first one didn't work. Unlike most comedians of the era, he had a distinct style. He did not rely on loud punchlines or slapstick. His humor was understated but incisive. That was adored by the audiences. The deed wasn't permanent. One of its members was drafted at the commencement of World War II. Joey soon received a call to serve as well. He enlisted in 1942 and rose to the rank of sergeant in the Special Services of the U.S. Army. Even in the military, he continued to enjoy comedy. He maintained Army morale by providing entertainment. He gained confidence in a new way by performing for his fellow soldiers. Joey Bishop returned to comedy after World War II with a renewed sense of purpose. He had been a member of a tiny group known as the Bishop Brothers prior to the conflict. He had to carry on by himself after his collaborators were drafted in 1941, yet it was a combination of comedy and music. He continued to go by his stage persona and relied on his sharp sense of humor and fast comebacks to make a name for himself. He returned to the stage right away after leaving the military in 1945. He began playing in New Jersey's Casablanca Roadhouse and other tiny bars. He recognized every show was an opportunity to get better, even though the audiences were small. In contrast to the boisterous and raucous humor that was fashionable at the time, his comedy had a distinct style. He used dry, understated language rather than large gestures or outrageous punchlines. His speech was personal, he found humor in ordinary things, and he poked fun of himself. It succeeded. He started playing in larger venues including New York's Latin Quarter and the Greenwich Village Inn in a matter of years. For a young comedian in the late 1940s, he was earning $1,000 a week, which was a substantial sum. The largest platform for performers at the time was television. Bishop took every chance he could since he knew this was his next move. He began participating on variety shows in 1950, such as The Ed Sullivan Show. He gained national visibility as a result. However, his big break came when Frank Sinatra witnessed him perform in a club. Bishop was performing in the Latin Quarter in 1952 when Sinatra happened to be there. Sinatra was drawn to something about his timing and delivery. Bishop was offered a position as his opening act at Bill Miller's Riviera in Fort Lee, New Jersey, following the performance. Soon after, he was in New York, performing at the Copacabana. Some of the largest venues in the nation were these. A star was not all that Sinatra was. A kingmaker, he was. He opened doors if he liked you. For Bishop, they did as well. Though he wasn't merely capitalizing on Sinatra's popularity, people began referring to him as Sinatra's funny. His unique style set him apart from other comedians. He never used harsh or boisterous humor. He didn't use outrageous performances or make fun of others. Rather, his self-satire gave viewers the impression that they were part of the joke. His speech to the crowd was one of his greatest ploys. Because he referred to them as folks, everything felt intimate. He wasn't only a joker. He related tales. Every time he talked about his early years, he made it seem more humorous than it actually was. His statement that his family had been so impoverished that he had to utilize throughout the winter was one of his favorite lines. It was straightforward but effective. Because they perceived something genuine in it, they laughed. Bishop stood apart at an era when comedy was crowded with well-known figures because of his ability to engage an audience. He remained composed and self-assured despite others yelling or acting out crazy roles. Even though his career was only beginning, he was clearly demonstrating that he didn't have to be the loudest person in the room to elicit the most laughs. The silent engine that propelled the Rat Pack was Joey Bishop. Bishop worked in the background, molding their humor and maintaining the act's vigor as Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, and Sammy Davis Jr. took the stage. He served as the group's comedian, bringing dry, easy wit to counterbalance their exaggerated personas. His solemn face earned him the nickname Fro Prince, was what gave their performances a memorable quality. The early 1950s marked the beginning of his path into the Rat Pack. When Sinatra saw him perform in Manhattan's Latin Quarter, he was instantly enthralled. Bishop never forced his jokes, they came naturally to him. It pleased Sinatra. Bishop's career was drastically altered when he chose Bishop to be his opening act. Bishop soon became a mainstay in Sinatra's world, sharing the stage with the biggest names in Hollywood in singing for sold-out audiences. The Rat Pack peaked around 1960. The group was more than just a show. A cultural phenomenon. They were. Their famed late-night performances took place at the Sands Hotel in Las Vegas. Fans flocked to the showroom to witness the blend of comedy, music, and erratic antics. Most individuals were unaware that Bishop was the author of a large portion of the content. The banter and quips he created gave the shows an air of spontaneity. His ability to play off each member's individuality made it look as though everything occurred spontaneously. But he made sure everything went properly behind the scenes. Bishop was largely in the background, even though he helped shape the group's humor. The stars that people came to see were Sinatra and Martin. Bishop didn't appear to care. He was the pillar of stability, the one who prevented everything from going totally wrong. Bishop saved the evening with a well-timed one-liner when the jokes became too wild or it began to lose focus. It was easy to ignore but impossible to replace the structure his humor provided to the group. He did more with the Rat Pack than just perform on stage. In films like Sergeants 3 and Ocean's 11, he contributed to the group's camaraderie with his comedic timing. The first gala thrown by John F. Kennedy in 1961, however, was one of the most significant events in his career. The influence of the Rat Pack, who had been ardent supporters of Kennedy's campaign, was evident in this incident. It was not merely a show. It was a historic occasion. Bishop was tasked with keeping the evening lively by fusing humor with the occasion's sophistication. He managed it perfectly. He glanced at the Kennedys as they came and remarked, "I promised to get you a nice seat." The audience adored it. Despite being a brief instance, it demonstrated Bishop's significance. He was able to address the nation's most prominent individuals. Make them chuckle without exerting too much effort. Trouble was simmering behind the scenes, even though Joey Bishop was having a great time with the Rat Pack. His once strong connection with Frank Sinatra began to deteriorate in the early 1960s. The tipping point was when Sinatra requested Bishop to cover for him at the resort he partially owned, the Calneva Lodge. Sinatra anticipated allegiance. Bishop, he believed, would seize the opportunity. Bishop, however, refused to accept and instead gave a list of demands. A luxury jet and $50,000 were his desires. This was a slap in Sinatra's face. He had assigned Bishop to the Rat Pack. He was a star because of him. Bishop now pretended that he was the one helping Sinatra. He was not happy about that. Loyalty had been Sinatra's foundation. He anticipated the same response. Bishop's request seemed like a betrayal. It was that. He was cut off by Sinatra. Bishop wasn't a member of the group. It was more than just losing his place in the gang. Sinatra ensured his removal from important initiatives. Bishop had been considered when Robin and the Seven Hoods were first conceived. He has now been replaced. The message was unambiguous. He was no longer accepted. Bishop was severely impacted by this. Already, he had felt like the group's least valuable person. Right now, he was totally outside. His demands had not been met. He lost everything, not simply more respect. He was resentful about the fallout. His anger wasn't limited to Sinatra. His frustration was with the industry as a whole. Even though he put in a lot of effort, he always seemed to be in the background. A fellow Rat Pack member recognized the emotion. His difficulties were distinct but equally annoying. Lawford had a unique position in Hollywood since he was the brother-in-law of John F. Kennedy. There were issues with that link, though. His political connections occasionally overshadowed his acting career. Although they didn't directly disagree, he and Bishop both felt alienated. Bishop's rejection just grew more intense. He missed important occurrences. Being selected to host a significant charity event was one of the most agonizing experiences. Bishop may have previously held that position. He was being replaced now. Without him, the entertainment industry continued on its way. That feeling stayed with Bishop forever. He didn't hide his dissatisfaction, but he also didn't talk about what had happened in public too much. He mentioned in passing that he felt underappreciated in interviews. He detested his portrayal in the media. As though he hadn't earned his spot in the Rat Pack, people pretended that he had been fortunate to be a member. That hurt. Years later, Bishop was still unable to escape the past. Despite his prolonged career, he was always defined by the Rat Pack. Something mythical had involved him. He had been forced out of it, too. It was a wound that never healed completely. Joey Bishop was always able to maintain her prominence. He continued to move forward despite the ups and downs in his profession. The Joey Bishop Show, a sitcom that was partially based on his life, starred him in 1961. He portrayed Hollywood public relations specialist Joey Barnes. He was able to show off his comedy on the show, although it had trouble with ratings right from the start. On NBC, the first season was broadcast in black and white. It gained considerable attention when the network changed it to color a year later. Two of the biggest names in television at the time, Sheldon Leonard and Danny Thomas, developed one of the first color sitcoms. With Abby Dalton playing Joey's wife and Corbett Monica as his best buddy, the cast of the show was impressive. The show was never a big hit, but guest performers like Jimmy Durante and Andy Williams made it more appealing. NBC canceled it in 1964. CBS decided to take a chance when they decided to air it. They revived the program in black and white. Viewers were accustomed to color television by that point. Reversing course felt like a mistake. Even with well-known guests like Sammy Davis Jr. and Peter Lawford, the ratings were declining. After a year, CBS permanently terminated the program. Comedian Von Meter had one of the most peculiar moments in the history of the show. He gained notoriety by pretending to be President John F. Kennedy. An episode of The Joey Bishop Show was taped by him on November 15, 1963. Kennedy was killed 1 week later. It was never seen again because NBC decided not to broadcast the episode. It has not been found since. The show helped make Joey Bishop a well-known TV personality, despite its lackluster performance. He had not finished yet. He took on a more difficult task in 1967. His own late-night talk show, The Joey Bishop Show, was given to him by ABC. Johnny Carson, the titan of late-night television, was his opponent this time. It was a hard fight to compete with The Tonight Show. He had tried, as had many others. Most had not succeeded. Bishop's performance was different. Conversational and more laid back. As his sidekick, he brought on Regis Philbin, who got his first significant break on national television. The program included comedic sketches, musical acts, and interviews with celebrities. On occasion, Peter Lawford and Sammy Davis Jr. appeared as unexpected visitors. Although these efforts were made, ratings were never high. Few viewers wanted to move from Carson's devoted following. However, Bishop had a knack for drawing attention. Unexpectedly, something happened in July 1968. Regis Philbin left the show live on television. He claimed that the criticism from the network annoyed him and worried that he was putting off the performance. The story made headlines, and the audience was left in a state of shock. The truth was revealed later. All of this was a publicity gimmick that Bishop himself had organized. It did the trick for a while. People were interested in what would happen next, so they tuned in. But the rise in ratings was short-lived. After 2 seasons, the sitcom was canceled by ABC in 1969. Bishop was a well-known figure on television, despite the short-lived nature of his late-night show. He returned to anchoring The Tonight Show as a guest host, something he had done prior to launching his own program. Carson frequently needed fill-ins, and Bishop was one of the few people who could do it. Joey Bishop felt that he was falling behind as the 1970s progressed. Comedies were evolving quickly. The comedians of the new generation had replaced him, and their approach was completely different. The pioneers were George Carlin and Richard Pryor. They weren't merely joking. They were making comments, transforming hardships from everyday life into humor that was honest and unvarnished. Pryor discussed everything from his difficult upbringing to his battles with addiction. His tales weren't merely amusing. They were feeling something. They had a genuine feel. Carlin, however, rebelled against his surroundings. He made people think as much as they laughed with his incisive observations on society and politics. Quick comebacks and smart wordplay had been the cornerstones of Bishop's career. He had the ideal sense of humor for late-night TV and nightclubs. However, that look seemed dated now. The audience desired a change. They desired comedy that was unconventional. They were looking for personal humor. Bishop wasn't a comic like that, and he had no intention of changing. He was hampered by more than just the change in comedy. He was no longer with the Rat Pack, and his connection with Sinatra had never been solid. It was much more difficult for him to stay relevant without the industry connections he had previously. The new generation wasn't the only one pushing him out. People were forgetting him. The career of Bishop had virtually vanished by the 1980s. He did a few movie roles, although there weren't many. He appeared in the action movie The Delta Force, which starred Chuck Norris, in 1986. Despite the success of the film, Bishop's role received very little attention. He had an appearance in his son Larry Bishop's 1996 film Mad Dog Time. Even though it was a personal endeavor, it didn't help him regain his reputation. Not all of his hiatus from the entertainment industry was due to a lack of work. Years of failures have led to it. Influence had been lost when he lost the Rat Pack. He had become out of touch due to his unwillingness to change. Bishop had remained the same while comedy had progressed. He was no longer with the world that had once praised him. In 1941, Joey Bishop and Sylvia Ruska were married. Sylvia died of cancer in 1999, although they remained together for 58 years. Even when Bishop was away for extended periods of time due to his job, their marriage endured the highs and lows of Hollywood. He was a vital member of the Rat Pack and performed with Sammy Davis Jr., Dean Martin, and Frank Sinatra most of the time. Sylvia supported him despite the fact that such a lifestyle may strain any marriage. She took care of their house, reared their son, and ensured their family remained stable while Bishop was away on the road. The foundation of their relationship was trust. They always managed to reconnect, even after being apart for a long time. Sylvia maintained her composure with a quiet strength. She managed the demands of celebrity without trying to attract attention to herself. She was Bishop's steadying influence, even though he was the one in the spotlight. In 1948, their lone son, Larry, was born. Despite being surrounded by Hollywood as a child, he chose to pursue his own career rather than rely on his father's celebrity. He attended Beverly Hills High School and went on to pursue careers as a director, writer, and actor. He became well known for his early parts in films like Wild in the Streets and The Savage Seven, and he later directed pictures like Mad Dog Time and Hell Ride. Although his route was comparable to Bishop's, he never had a close contact with Bishop. Bishop was frequently away on stage or filming television, and their personal life suffered as a result. They treated one another with respect. However, no strong emotional bond existed. Although Larry has talked about how his father influenced his work, there was never any affection in their relationship, rather, it was always stiff. Bishop stood out among the Rat Pack for another reason, despite his reputation for being witty and perceptive. He abstained from alcohol and narcotics. Bishop avoided the crazy nights that Sinatra, Martin, and Davis Jr. were renowned for. He wanted to maintain his composure since he was aware of how quickly celebrity may lead to self-destruction. It had nothing to do with superiority. All he wanted was to have authority. That aspect of him was respected by his pals. Despite the fact that the celebrations continued into the morning, Bishop remained grounded. When Sylvia passed away, everything was different. He had relied on her. The one who kept him in touch with the world outside of Hollywood. He pulled back without her. He rarely socialized and made fewer public appearances. Losing Sylvia exacerbated the deterioration in his condition. He found solace in his Newport Beach home, a peaceful haven away from the thrills of his former life. The history of that house was unique. Bishop and Sylvia had been sailing back from Mexico in the late 1970s when they encountered a violent storm. Waves loomed over them at 16 feet, and winds reached 60 knots. They finally docked at the Balboa Bay Club in Newport Beach, barely making it to safety. They were influenced by that incident and eventually made the decision to purchase a home on Lido Isle. They were able to flee the mayhem of Hollywood and find refuge there. Despite being the final member of the Rat Pack to survive, Joey Bishop never felt respectable. He was the comedian, the one who kept the crowd laughing as the others performed and sang. He was once referred to as the hub of the huge wheel by Sinatra, indicating that he was important. However, Bishop never felt that the group really thought that of him. His perception of himself as the most underappreciated member persisted for years. Every time he read a book on the Rat Pack, he saw something that disturbed him. Occasionally, his name was even less prominent than Peter Lawford's. Accepting that was difficult. It was made worse by one of columnist Earl Wilson's articles. According to the report, Bishop only interacted with Sinatra when asked, acting as though he were merely a visitor. Bishop was more aware. He was aware of his position. The leader wasn't him. But he had a significant role in making their performances successful. Not because Sinatra was helping him, but because he belonged there. Despite these annoyances, Bishop never complained about Sinatra. He was respectful of him. Sinatra loved honesty above all else, and he wanted to remind people of that. A young woman's desire to meet Sinatra was one of Bishop's favorite tales. She was given the opportunity by Sinatra. He was respectful and kind to her. Bishop shared tales like that because he wanted people to see Sinatra for who he truly was, not just the crazy, exaggerated version that everyone thought they knew. The most important thing to Bishop was loyalty. When Sinatra passed away, he declined to publish a book that would reveal everything. Millions were offered by publishers for him to divulge personal information. However, he rejected each of them. It felt like a betrayal to him. He wasn't going to sell out the unique item the Rat Pack had created because everyone wanted to gossip about it. Moreover, Bishop detested the way their legacy had been perverted over time. People's attention was drawn to the drinking, the parties, and the scandals. They failed to recognize the Rat Pack's true influence. They transformed entertainment. For racial equality, they stood. Sammy Davis Jr. was black, and hotels in Las Vegas wouldn't allow him stay. The Rat Pack wouldn't play until that changed. Bishop wanted people to remember that kind of story. Even his own profession had its ups and downs. He had a 4-year run as a star of the Joey Bishop program, but his late-night chat program did not do well. Television late at night was dominated by Johnny Carson. Bishop's show was kept free of well-known guests by him and his team. His chances were harmed by that, but he had little choice. Sometimes he felt forgotten, even in the Rat Pack. Not everyone realized that he was the one who added humor to their performances. For some, he was merely an extra, someone who was fortunate enough to be present. He was always uncomfortable with that impression. He took pride in his accomplishments. He had made people laugh throughout his life, and no one could take that away from him. He was in declining health by 2005. In one of his final interviews, he lost his sense of direction and was unable to continue. On October 17, 2007, 2 years later, he died at the age of 89. The original Rat Pack ended with his death. Bishop has a convoluted legacy. He had performed with one of the greatest entertainment ensembles in history, but he frequently felt undervalued. He did not, however, allow resentment to define him. He remained loyal to his values, refused to turn on his friends, and clung to the conviction that their joint creation was still important. Even if he didn't always receive the recognition he was due, he was certain that he had contributed to something significant. Ultimately, that was sufficient.